With the Power Broker, we've reached the midpoint of the series, and I think some seams are starting to show. I've seen a lot of people lose enthusiasm over this episode or dismiss the show entirely if they were already on the fence, and honestly, I get it. I think episode 3 is a fun ride, but it's a really poor follow-through on how well I felt the plotting was handled in episode 2. Not to say this one drops all the interesting commentary. I think it's a decent follow-up on the compelling themes and concepts laid out by the previous episode, since we're still making time out to address the race issue, nationalism, and legacy, but the structure of the character-driven story suddenly feels very sloppy, and in some way it feels like I was dropped into a different show this week. Let me tell you right now, my main investment in this show lies with the aspects of the story that we set up last week. I want to spend our time thoroughly exploring Isaiah Bradley, John Walker, the Flag Smashers as sympathetic figures, and the way race informs Sam and Bucky's shared, conflicting journey towards honoring Steve Rogers' legacy. And it's not like the show has forgotten those elements. We open by juxtaposing an in-universe ad for a border restoration project with Walker performing a violent raid in search for Carly Morgenthau. Walker seems to be swiftly breaking under the pressure of being Captain America, and I don't know, it definitely looks to me like we're building Walker to be some level of unhinged. I might be wrong about that. We did establish early in Star Spangled Man that he's a guy who's used to punching his way out of problems, but I feel like him blowing up during the raid, plus the off-kilter shaky cam and obvious positioning of Lamar as the voice of reason is all obvious coding. Scattered throughout the episode, informed by the surprisingly woke Zemo, we maintain some discussion of blackness. The Marvin Gaye talk on the plane has some really interesting implications for Bucky as someone who's maybe more stuck in the 50s than Steve was. Zemo and Sharon provide two perspectives which I think the show needed here and now. Zemo being the first main character with extensive dialogue who's not an American and who speaks to the problems with our cultural tendency to put individuals on pedestals, that's really cool. Sharon takes it a step further, being an American citizen for whom the bloom of both national loyalty and superheroes has faded completely, after being abandoned by superheroes and her country for doing the right thing. We confirm that it was experimentation on Isaiah Bradley that gave us our current super soldier problems, and we get Sam's righteous indignation as Isaiah is continually dehumanized. Finally, we get another split between Bucky and Sam, as Sam decides maybe the symbol of the shield is better off destroyed, and Bucky resolves that he'll take up the symbol himself if no one else will, or at the very least will take it away from Walker. I like to think that this is the result of Sam maybe absorbing some of Zemo and Sharon's perspectives through their interactions, and it's a really good mini character arc for the episode. As I suggested in the previous video, Sam is choosing to look at the shield as the symbol that it is, and Bucky is looking at it as the physical memory of his friend, which it also is. Sam, influenced by Zemo and Sharon, as well as his own desire to avoid taking up the mantle, would rather undermine the symbol than rise to the occasion of maintaining the meaning infused into it by Steve. And Bucky would rather have that meaning maintained than he would focus on his own personal individual needs. All of that stuff? That's great. I really like it. The problem, however, is twofold. Firstly, this episode is plotted like a bad video game side quest. I honestly think it's 15 minutes worth of plot stretched out over a 40-minute episode, and frankly it feels like the story contrives plot point after plot point just to bring Zemo and Sharon in and give them a reason to tag along. From the flimsy prison escape to the Madripoor stuff, we even have a bit of a double beat where we walk in on Zemo's contact and then Sharon's contact both as they're listening to music, get a bit of info, then we shoot them and move on. Structurally, there's no reason that Zemo couldn't have been the one to take Sam and Bucky straight to Nagel, no involvement from Sharon needed. It leads to the whole Madripoor sequence feeling like a really non-economic use of valuable screen time. But hey, we get Zemo dancing, and that was probably worth it. Letting go of everything else for a second, having Zemo back at all is just a real good time. It's so enticing to see what kind of guy he is now that he's not stuck in the shadows, single-mindedly focused on his grief and revenge. That he's such a fun presence and so vocally anti-superhero makes me excited for where we could take him past this show. Fingers crossed he doesn't die. Also, he really has been a Baron this whole time. Go fig. The second problem with this episode is that we officially have way too many balls in the air. The introduction of Sharon and Zemo already threatens to feel like one too many moving parts in the narrative. I've already mentioned that I think it's in the show's interest to keep an eye on Walker, Bradley, and the Flag Smashers as main story elements, Now keep in mind that we've got those things on the table, and now Zemo, Sharon, and Ao of the Dora Milaje, and then recall that we also have Danny Torres, Sam's family, Bucky's therapist, and maybe Nakajima to consider before we finish out the series. We're threatening to spread ourselves way too thin and hurt the story in the process. Heck, part of me wonders if, for all they're thematically interesting to have around, maybe the story would be better off without Zemo and Sharon in it at all with how contrived their involvement is. Last video, I discussed the Flag Smashers and where I think the show will ultimately land as far as condemnation of them. By the end of this episode, we have Carly Morgenthau blow up a building with innocent people inside, and as pointed out by a friend of mine, that feels like a real cheap move to get the viewer to sympathize with her less, and not earned by character the way the same tactic was with Killmonger and Black Panther. Maybe it'll turn out the movement as a whole retains sympathy even as Carly individually slips off the deep end? On paper, I don't actually think it's that bad. You can see how Carly's screen time up to now is pushing her to that more ruthless, hopeless place, but it takes a couple of viewings to really click because this character and her plotline feels so disconnected from what's going on with our protagonists. Frankly, she gets kinda lost in this episode, so it's hard for her scenes to have any impact. Again, we're halfway through this show, and she and the other main characters haven't formed a relationship of any kind. I really hope the latter half of the series can do her more justice and build more of a dynamic because she has a lot of narrative potential. The Power Broker really captures the importance of a well-structured plot, which is usually something the MCU has so down pat that it's a major contributor to accusations of formulaicness. That's a word, right? Sure. There's a lot of really tasty, nutritious meat in this episode, but the plot skeleton that all that theme and character-based meat is hanging on has way more bones than necessary, and that's making the meat jut out in weird places. But hey, that's just me. According to some of you guys in the community poll, this is actually your favorite of the three so far, so let me know what you think about it in the comments and any of my criticisms. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the future.